Throughout the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, combating the spread of misinformation in the media and on social media platforms has been a constant, and ethical studies of the ways that these were addressed could be abundant. Most notably, Spotify came under fire for their participation in misinformation about COVID-19, leading to mixed opinions and political views. Spotify is a streaming platform with over 400 million active users, with access to both music and over 3.2 million podcasts. Spotify signed a $100 million deal with the Joe Rogan Experience podcast for exclusive streaming rights, and it's currently the most popular podcast on the platform. Spotify's dilemma stems from the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, and specifically one episode with virologist Dr. Robert Malone, who stated controversial information about the COVID-19 vaccine. Things continued to then escalate when a video compilation surfaced of Joe Rogan using a racial slur on his podcast. Spotify was placed in an ethical dilemma on how to handle the crisis and determining if removing the episodes would be a violation of First Amendment rights, and to look at the liability that they might face if they were determined to be a publisher over a platform for media content. With Spotify's crisis being recent, statements issued by both Joe Rogan and Spotify were really easily to access online. I was also able to find a code of conduct and ethics issued to employees in 2018, as well as the new rules of engagement issued by Spotify in 2022 as a result of the crisis. I reviewed the statements of each party, their subsequent actions, and compared those against the code of conduct of ethics from 2018 and 2022, and to general communications ethics tests like TERS, and really looked at the ethical implications of misinformation. The Joe Rogan Experience podcast released episode 1757 on December 31st, 2021, featuring Dr. Robert Malone, who had previously been banned from Twitter for spreading misinformation about the COVID-19 vaccine. On January 12th, a group of over 270 medical professionals, professors, and students signed a letter asking Spotify to address their lack of guidelines on misinformation and to address the release of the episode, which also led to artists like Joni Mitchell and Neil Young requesting that their music be removed from Spotify if the Joe Rogan Experience episode were allowed to remain. On January 30th, Daniel Ek, the Spotify CEO, released a statement to address the controversy, really focusing on how seriously they're taking it, that they're continuing to partner with experts and invest heavily on the platform, and that they would be adding content advisory warnings and links to an information hub on any content that discussed COVID-19 or the pandemic. They also, in this statement, shared that they would be sharing their rules of engagement or platform rules on their website. In a Q4 earnings call, Ek also stated, that they've taken dramatic steps, but he also talked about how they don't yet know what the economic impact of that for Spotify would be as far as the controversy that had come from the Joe Rogan Experience episode. From there, Joe Rogan published a 10-minute apology video explaining his intent to interview interesting people with differing opinions, but to find more of a balance when it comes to the viewpoints that he shares. Around this time, a video showing Rogan using racial slurs 24 times on his podcast began to gain traction and led to another statement from Rogan and Spotify. Daniel Ek issued a memo specifically into employees to address the new issue, really apologizing for the insensitive language and the impact that was having on them, and promised to contribute $100 million towards elevating marginalized groups' music as part of their apology. Joe Rogan also continued on to post another Instagram video with another apology for the racially insensitive language. So in 2018, a PDF file was uploaded to the web showing the code of conduct and ethics issued to Spotify employees. In reviewing this, there were 3 core concepts: do the right thing, be nice, and play fair, with do the right thing having a specific statement about acting with honesty, integrity, and reliability, and keeping moral and ethical standards sky high. A lot of times with codes of ethics, there isn't a way to enforce them, but Spotify addressed this in the same document by providing an entire section around reporting illegal and unethical behavior. As part of Spotify's response to the Joe Rogan Experience podcast controversy, they released their platform rules. These differed from what was released in 2018 to employees. They were a little bit more comprehensive and really outlined the things that were okay on the platform and what the consequences of repeated violations would be. They had specific content about prohibiting content that promotes dangerous or false or deceptive medical information that could cause offline harm or pose a direct threat to public health. And the consequences of this that they outlined would be that accounts would be suspended or terminated. So now let's analyze what the implications of misinformation can be and how they stand up to something like the TERRS test. So looking at TERRS, it's 5 ethical principles looking at truthfulness, authenticity, respect, equity, and social responsibility. Joe Rogan's Robert Malone episode can be said to lack truthfulness in that it didn't provide accurate information. It lacks social responsibility in that it promoted fear and a misunderstanding of a vaccine that was already widely shown to have positive health outcomes. When you look at Spotify's response, they were truthful in how they planned to address the crisis. They were transparent in publishing Spotify's platform rules and outlining how the situations would be addressed in the future. They addressed issues with their stakeholders and disclosing that they were not yet aware of the financial impacts of the controversy. And they also addressed their employees, who are another stakeholder, about their decisions and why they were made, which really goes back to that respect piece and the equity piece. The bigger ethical impacts of this crisis are more based in the content of Joe Rogan's podcast episode over Spotify's response to it. However, misinformation is one of the biggest issues facing both publishers and platforms of media content. And studies have found that the more frequently users see misinformation, even when it's marked as false, the less likely they are to see it as unethical to share that information again. Specifically, when it comes to medical and health information, the media plays a large role in how consumers receive that information, and a lack of understanding and clarity leads to consumer anxiety and confusion. This can be mitigated by increasing consumer knowledge of health and biostatistics and by having media platforms take the responsibility of warning consumers of potential misinformation. When it comes to correcting misinformation, and in Spotify's case, determining how to address it on its platform, it's important to understand how information is received by consumers. Emily Thorson shared in a 2016 study that even when misinformation is corrected, the attitude of the consumer is not as easily changed, a concept that she coined a belief echo. This means that even if the misinformation is corrected, the consumer sees the correction. While they may not continue to believe it, their attitude about the topic remains set by that original misinformation piece. So looking at what Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes stated, the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. The amount of misinformation and the difficulty in correcting beliefs once false information is received shows that the marketplace of ideas may not be the best test of truth any longer. Understanding this belief persistence, Spotify's decision to put a warning label on the episode rather than to remove it was an ethical move, but it may not be enough to correct consumer beliefs and attitudes. This then leads to the question of if Spotify has the responsibility for the content that's streamed on its site. Spotify holds that it's a platform rather than a publisher of content, which is a distinction that's echoed on other social media platforms as well, like Facebook and Instagram, because it provides immunity from civil and criminal liability for the content that's on the platforms under a 1996 law. With being a platform, Spotify then has to question if removing the episode violates a First Amendment right to free speech, or if it's considered censorship at that point. If I were managing Spotify's communication and action plan during the crisis, I would have done several things the same way. A timely response and statement like Spotify's is crucial when a crisis is widespread and trending. Working closely with the content creator was also a good strategy to ensure both partners are in line with what was released to the public. And the area where I found the most conflict was around the decision to either keep or remove episode 1757 with Dr. Robert Malone. Ultimately, I think Spotify made the correct decision in leaving the episode available with the warning label. I think removing controversial episodes can fuel misinformation and especially conspiracy theories around the information, which would have the opposite effect when it comes to correcting misinformation. While warning labels are not very effective, it's still Spotify doing their part when it comes to social responsibility to correct the information and keep consumers informed. In promising the $100 million to elevate minority voices after Rogan's racial slur crisis, they helped promote equity. I also agreed with their decision to make the platform rules public and provide an avenue for reporting violations. Future steps for Spotify will need to include upholding the platform rules without bias and remaining transparent to repair the relationships that were damaged during the controversy. In the same way that Spotify promised funding towards elevating minority voices, I think that Spotify could have also taken a stand on supporting media literacy in consumers, one of the ways that misinformation can be combated. This support for education on identifying and navigating media would then need to be publicly advertised as part of their good faith efforts. Overall, while the content of the Joe Rogan Experience episode had unethical information and impacts, Spotify's response was ethical when you look at it from a communication standpoint. They were truthful, transparent, respectful of their varying stakeholders, and they took immediate action to promote equity and social responsibility.